Guys, thank you so much for joining us to chat about your beautiful film, Fiela that was released last year. My name is Kaye Williams, and I look after the local films for Mnet, our broadcaster in South Africa. And we have Brett, who is the director of the film, Zenobia, who is the star and the titular character, Fiela. And then obviously we have Wayne, who is our dear Benjamin.
Great, thank you
Okay.
so much for having us.
Great to be here.
Awesome. So, Brett, I want to start with you. This is based on an iconic book, and there's a much-loved film as well that people watch on a regular basis every Christmas and family gathering. So the thought of doing an adaptation of the book and a reinterpretation of the film was quite daunting for us, I know. What was your approach in terms of your interpretation, and how did you want to differentiate it?
I mean, there was absolutely no pressure going into this at all. I think that the fact that I really love the story is something which just set me on the right track. I wasn't here to necessarily try and replace the previous film adaptation or necessarily change the book, but rather to add to the narrative, because I believe the novel of Fiela is timeless literature, and in the same way we see Greta Gerwig doing a reimagining of Pretty Woman, which has been done multiple times, same with Pride and Prejudice. I figured that in the case of literature like this, we could use that and use it to view the lens of 2020, 2019, because the previous film was done about 30 years before this. So given they do a new Batman every 3-4 years, I think we gave enough time to kind of respect the work that was done by Katinka and Charlene. And it wasn't to reimagine their film. It was actually, I hadn't watched the movie when I started writing the script, Katinka's film. I really wanted to go back to the source material and see what resonated with me and how I could use it to fit into the current conversation in South Africa. And I think the thing that differentiates this film is that I really wanted to shift so much of the focus more evenly to Fiela and the Komotie family. I found that when I remembered the book, because I read it as a 12-year-old, that Fiela and Benjamin were the ones that stood out to me. But when I read the book again, I realized that actually only Fiela's storyline is quite small in the narrative. It's very Benjamin focused. It's very focused on the Van Rooyen family, which I found wasn't something I wanted to lean into. I wanted to explore Fiela's flaws, her darkness, her persistence, her love, and to really make this a love story between a mother and a son. But I'd say on a narrative level, that really is what differentiates this film from the previous one. And then just cinematically, cinema language has changed a lot in 30 years. So we assembled a crew and a team of actors who are all pretty much starting to come up in the industry at the moment, and used the language that we like to speak to give this narrative a voice.
Great. So, I mean, I think you said Greta Gerwig did Pretty Women and not Little Women.
Sorry, Little Women.
It's not Julia
Yes.
Roberts. Not that. Okay, great. So what was essential for you from the book that you felt needed to translate? You know, because obviously when you adapt from book to screenplay, there are certain things that you lose, characters that you lose, storylines that you lose. But what was it that was essential to you that needed to be retained in the essence of the story?
To me, it was the mother-son love relationship, and that affected the narrative structure, because in the book you have 3 voices, Fiela, Benjamin, and then Elias has a whole storyline with elephants and very focused on his journey. But I just found that while that worked for the narrative, that distracted us from the story of mother and son. At the edge of frame, I really wanted to explore race relationships, the questions we're having around land and repatriation of that in South Africa. I didn't want to make that the focus. So when you do watch it, you'll see the core and everything is focused on this universal relationship that we all understand. And then edge of frame, we ask questions around how things have been handled, because this is pre-apartheid South Africa. We have a mixed race woman who owns land, whose kids are way more educated than the white kids in the forest. And in many ways, what we view in this film was planting the seeds or the foundation for what we currently sit with today, and to use that as a question as opposed to an answer. I think the other thing for me was to recognize that I need to come into the space with respect for the narrative, and then for the people that the story means so much to, specifically the Afrikaans people, brown and white. And it's quite tough because there's different tastes, different focus between those two groups, but to find a narrative that appeals to both, then to honor them and to try and further that dialogue takes a lot of energy, and it also takes a lot of respect.
And I mean, I think in this film, more than your other films, you've dealt with a bigger cast of children. A lot of those kids have gone on to do amazing things post Fiela. But tell me, what was your process like? How did you work differently with them versus how you worked with the adults?
I mean, one of the greatest joys of Fiela for me, beyond the actual film, has been to see so many actors use this as a launch pad to their careers, and specifically for the kids. I mean, we found some of them in we did a school kind of audition search where literally 40, 50 kids a day would show up, and you try and figure out what's happening. And now these kids have careers, which is such a joy to see. But they warn you in film school, don't work with children and animals. So we had many children, we had ostriches, we had horses, we had elephants. So we broke all those rules. But when it came to actually helping direct the children, I leaned very heavily on their parents. A big part of that, their preparation, I don't have the capacity to help them with that. So to have their parents on set was a huge asset to us, because not only did they prepare the kids with learning their lines, but they were there as comfort and, just there to support their children. The children had to learn accent work, and I think if you're Afrikaans, you'll really appreciate what little Luca, who plays younger Benjamin, did with his accent work, because in essence, we had to find a white kid who could pull off a brown accent without it being a stereotype or racist or condescending. And he managed to pull it off really well. I was really fortunate in that they actually could take direction like adults, which was quite surprising to me. Because often when dealing with kids at this age, you have to manipulate them to get an emotion. You really have to, when they react and you put that in the film, that's sometimes them reacting to hearing that lunch is going to be late, so they look a little sad. But beyond relying on the parents, I rely a lot on the adult actors who are acting opposite them, because they have to set a tone. They have to help the kids focus. And that's a lot of pressure, I think, especially for Zenobia, because she's trying to focus on her performance. But she knows that for her performance to work, also she has to carry these kids with her. So it really was a lot of stuff that came into play there.
So Zenobia, there was quite an extensive casting process that happened, and you were cast as this very iconic character to a lot of South Africans, and also, I don't know if it's like this with anyone else, but it's a name that has become sort of a nickname in our community as well, in the colored community. If you're a Fiela, it means you've adopted someone or some kid, or if you're a Salung, or we've often used these names in our families and in our community. What was it like when you realized that you were going to have to portray this character, and the pressure that you felt from two different communities?
I obviously did feel pressure to be playing the character, but I think what made it easier for me is that I have played her on stage. So the sort of wonderful thing was that a bit more than 10 years ago, I replaced June van Merch in the theatre production, and then 10 years after that, I stood in for Charlene Surti Richards for 2 weeks. And that was shortly before, that was about 2 or 3 months before the auditions for Fiela came up for the film, because we didn't know there was going to be, I didn't know there was going to be a film. So I think it was sort of serendipitous, and I kind of think God had a little bit of a hand in that, because I felt so comfortable in the character's shoes already. And obviously, when you do prepare, read the book and all of that kind of thing. So the character already sat quite well. I tried not to worry too much about what other people would say, because I figured the most important thing for me was to be true to the character, and that's what I focused on. So I felt a little bit of pressure within myself, but I tried to sort of steer away from that, because I just thought, let me just focus on the character. And luckily, having someone like Brett, direct, he kind of keeps you very calm, he's that kind of guy. Yeah, you're cool, dude, you're cool. So that was very important, that he he kept me very grounded, he made me feel incredibly safe. And that's a big part of it, because if you've got a director that makes you feel safe, that was very important for me. Yeah.
I mean,
I think
as
another
Brett
thing,
said,
just to
yeah,
throw
go
in
ahead.
there, is we didn't announce that this film was being made to the public until after we'd wrapped shooting, and it was a very specific choice to isolate us as creatives, so we didn't feel that pressure, because as soon as it hits social media, everyone has an opinion, and people forget that we are humans on the other side of this, and we read those comments and they take root in our hearts. And if we had to do a scene knowing that last night we'd read 3 comments saying this is the worst casting choice you could make, that would affect the performances. So we really had a sacred space for all creatives just to create.
Awesome. So, I mean, part of the role of cinema is to help us to confront ourselves as we are right now. So when Brett came with the pitch that, we want to explore Fiela's character a bit more, and who Fiela is, sorry, I just muted myself. So when he came to us and he spoke to us about who Fiela needs to be, we were all kind of surprised and taken aback, because we were worried that we were going to see sides of this woman that we did not want to see, right? And I think he did kind of explore that. He explored not only her relationship to Benjamin and the loss of Benjamin, but also her relationship to her other children and with her husband and her family as a whole. So what was it like when you read that script and you realized, oh, this is a little bit different to what I remember and to what I've read in the book? How did you process and prepare for that side of the journey of Fiela?
It was, interestingly, it was a bit scary, because I remember sitting with Brett in a coffee shop in Stellenbosch, and him saying to me, we were talking about sort of, how she's paying so much attention to this little white boy, but not doing the same for her children. And from my side as an actress, I have to always have the rationale. My character, I'm on the side of my character. So whatever her justification is for that, I have to accept that. And the justification for me was, this is the central motivation for me, for Fiela, is that she made a promise, and she wanted to stick to that promise, that she wouldn't let him go, that she would look after him, that she would care for him. And that's also why she just walked after him, and because she made a promise. But to be honest, it was quite scary to go to the darker places, because on stage you play a very boisterous, sort of out there character, that sort of borders sometimes on a little bit of a caricature sometimes, because she's and with this one, the inner journey had to happen quite hectically, and yet again, for me, I think it was important to have a director like Brett, because I felt incredibly safe to go to those places, where if he said to me, this is what he needs, then I explored that without feeling any sort of boundaries, because I knew that if I went too far, he is there to catch me. So yeah, that was, but it was quite an intense process to actually go through, because she's very, it's very exposed.
But
And there
I think it's
was,
also
yeah,
more realistic, isn't it? It's more realistic because when any mother who loses her child, other children are often neglected. Or if she has a child who is disabled or has some kind of a challenge, they're focused more on that child as opposed to the other. So even though it was uncomfortable and it was much more, I think, much more a realistic interpretation of what might have occurred in Fiela's family post losing Benjamin. But it's hard to confront, you know.
yeah, yeah, it is definitely, because there's, I mean, you yourself, having seen the film so many times, there's sort of a bit of an ugliness that sometimes comes up, a hardness to her,
Mm.
which was incredibly satisfying as an actress to explore those aspects of her. I think that was quite important. An interesting thing that often happened on set, and Brett will tell you, like, it's um, often what I was feeling inside wanted to scream, you know. So before doing a hectic scene, I would actually do the scream, you know, and actually play out the emotion in a very big way. And then you pull all of that back in so that it's so bottled up. And I think that provided a lot of the intensity for Fiela as well, because she's just sort of simmering the whole time and it's all behind the eyes. Was awesome to play, actually. But yeah, a wonderful character to explore.
So I mean, it's very different watching the film, the film that Katinka Haynes directed as a child in the politics of that time versus now being grown up, having done the play, having known the character, having played a caricature version of this character, and now, you know, portraying a different side of Fiela to a much more woke colored community who, you know, are quite vocal and quite you know, unafraid to show how they feel. So I know that there were a lot of, in different interviews, there was a lot of feedback around colored female identity that was thrown at you. And something interesting that you spoke about was the voice that Deleon Mathieu was able to provide to us as a colored community in the time when we couldn't do that for ourselves. Can you speak a little bit about that side of it and some of the flack that you received and that kind of how you handled that, basically?
Um, sure. I think, yeah, I think I'm understanding what you're asking. In terms of just, you know what, some of the comments that came my way was, you know, why must we do this film again? It's already been done. And then also, you know, the whole question of uh, why must we tell a white person's story telling a colored person's story, that kind of thing, sort of that cultural ownership. And my response to that was always, you know what, in the 80s, when we were not allowed to tell our own stories, when we didn't have the platform for it, here was a woman who was willing to go the extra mile, and she was willing to put her own name to be able to tell a colored story, or a person of color story, where we wouldn't have had that platform in the first place. I mean, one of the reasons I think Charlene Surti is so revered uh, in our culture is because she was one of the very first colored actresses to have played a lead in a film at the time. You know, so my whole thing is just, you know what, people are always going to have an opinion about everything, and I think it was important to, back in the day, the Limit had a lot of guts, Katinka Haynes had a lot of guts to tell the story, um, but it needed to be told again now, because we are in a completely different era now, and we are not held back by things like apartheid laws and that kind of thing, where you have to show certain aspects in a certain light. um, we can tell a story plain and simple the way we want to tell it, and not shy away from things like how colored people were treated back then. You wouldn't have to sort of walk on eggshells about it. um, you know, I mean, if you sure, I don't want to compare films, because I haven't watched the first one. I haven't watched it in a long time. But I mean, if you were to go back and have a look, I think you'll see that things would definitely approach in a different way. Because I think this film also brings a very personal touch. It looks at the humanity of this family, of this colored family, to truly see they're not just a color. They're a family. They're human beings, and that's what we're looking at. I mean, even Benjamin, he's a little boy, and he's her boy, and she's not seeing him as a white boy. He's her son. And whenever I spoke to Luca, I said to him, "You're brown. You are when you look at your family, you see brown people. Therefore, you also see yourself as brown because that's all you see. So therefore, you are a brown child." And you know, that whole thing of nature versus nurture. He's a brown child, you know, and I think that was important also that comes across. And that is why, you know, people often say, oh yeah, this whole thing of, you know, colored women or black women raising little white children, that was one of the topics that also came up quite hectically.
Yes.
But this isn't, and yes, I'm happy that conversation is happening, and it's an important conversation to have. But I think in this context, it's her son. You know, he's not looking after someone else's child. It is her son, and he happens to have a white skin. You know,
So I mean,
answer your question.
Yes, because we're speaking to issues of identity now, and I'm going to move to Wayne now. Wayne, I think that Benjamin was all of our first white boy crush when we were growing up, when we read this book in high school. So you as well took on a very iconic role. David Minnar is also, for the same reason that Charlie in City Riches is well loved, so is he. So you also had big shoes to fill, but you had a very different approach, I would say, in interpreting this character. It was a very gentle approach, I would say. What was your process like? Did you cut yourself off from any other materials other than the script that you had? How did you prepare for this role?
So yeah, definitely. I didn't, and Brett actually came to us beforehand and told us, you know, rather don't watch the film beforehand, or the previous film. So didn't watch the previous film beforehand. I had a copy of the book. I read the book again, but I guess the focus of my preparation was exactly the script that was handed to us. A lot of it was drawn from personal experience rather than another thing. I think one of the first things I said to Brett was, okay, cool, there's this Meisner workshop. Should I go to the Meisner workshop? Like, he was like, whoa, don't go all crazy. Like, you know, calm down. Let's be sort of a personal journey. So I drew from a lot of things that had happened in my personal life. And then I think we worked very well together sort of as a cast. I'll speak first about, I guess, Benjamin in the Meisner Forest, and then Benjamin as Fiela's son. And first with Melissa Villering, who played Nina, older Nina. We specifically consulted the book because I guess there was, just to find sort of a little bit more sustenance to their relationship and what had happened in their story. But with Fiela and with Zenobia, it was, I think, far more a process of working together on set, off set as well. We were shooting on location, so we spent a lot of time together off set. One of the most sort of memorable rehearsals that I had with Zenobia was one night in Worcester. We were sitting in front of a fire, and she almost recreated a scene with me where we did the scene so there are three different versions of Benjamin. There's infant Benjamin, there's younger Benjamin, who Luca plays, and then older Benjamin, myself. And Zenobia had rehearsed scenes with each of these three Benjamins with me. So that night when we were sitting in front of the fire, she literally cradled me like a baby and sang to me and spoke and went through some of her lines with me. So just sort of to create a history with me as actor based on these three different characters. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about the story, is that each of these characters have such a long, such a great history. They literally have, the narrative runs from the start of some of their lives, like Benjamin's, right 20 or 30 years into the future. So there's a lot to draw on and a lot to work from, and we ended up spending a lot of time on set and off set, just working together to sort of create these histories together. And as you're mentioning now, in terms of identity, I think I think there's a little bit of Benjamin in everyone. I think everyone is on this endless search for identity, for who they are, for where they fit in, for what journey they're on. I hope that answers the
So
question.
I mean,
Wayne would also
no,
he would watch Luca quite a bit, and like actually there was I wouldn't say mimicry or copying, but he would watch this 10-year-old and just draw little bits of how he reacts or how he does stuff, and put that into his performance. And something really special on the song that Zenobia sang, because she would sing that to all the kids, and it's by Francis van Cooke and Karen Zoid, called Tu Vind Ek Jou, which is actually a love song between two lovers who are separated and how they're trying to fight to get to each other. And we always just felt that was Fiela's song to Benjamin, saying, I tried, but I couldn't fight the monsters in the darkness. And that's the song that actually plays at the end of the film. So that full circle journey of how that actually helped get performances out of actors, and then how it was used in the trailer was really special.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the key differences for me in Benjamin's journey with regards to the book versus Brett's adaptation is that Benjamin's, the second part of the book, which is very much about Benjamin and Nina's relationship, is not as focused on. It's more about him in the Van Rooyen family, him trying to find himself, him wrestling with his own feelings, and then sort of the freedom that he experiences once he's released from that. So it was interesting that you said that you actually went back to the book to find that sustenance that you needed for your relationship with Nina. But in terms, because we, as I'm saying we because I feel part of the team, but because Brett really upped Fiela's story and narrative, it automatically had an effect on your story, Wayne, or the story that you were interpreting, because now your story was much more about your relationship with her versus Nina, which is how it is in the book. And it was a balance, I think, Brett, trying to find that and making it work. So what, I think it was quite interesting in watching the film, the emotional pulling that you almost felt in your character to your brown family. Did you ever struggle in finding that kind of substance for your character, or like how did you feel you needed to differentiate what you were doing versus what was in the book and the first film?
Sorry. So I guess, yeah, as I said, I think I drew from personal experience. I think the film, as you mentioned, focuses very much on Benjamin and Fiela's journey together. And I think the film is about loss, and it is about motherhood, and it is about love more than anything else. And I guess, at the time in my own life, I'd recently lost my own mother, and I'd used that sort of as a basis in terms of drawing on emotion that was easily accessible or easy to recall. And I think that was really the sort of the impetus for me to focus on Fiela as a character and on this separation with this mother figure. So yeah, I guess I focused on personal experience, and just made a conscious effort to always have this character, this mother figure present, that's sort of like an invisible elastic band that you're just being pulled back to the whole time.
Yeah, I think what also really helped was that the young Benjamin came to the Van Rooyens quite plump and cute and, round from all the lovely food at home. And then when we saw you a couple of years later, you were quite scrawny and skinny.
Yeah.
So it made a difference.
Yeah,
but I mean, I think I just want to commend you guys, because I mean, we knew when we started this process a couple of years back, it would not be easy for any of you to do what you needed to do to make this film a success. So I want to say thank you to you. Thank you for chatting to me, and thank you for your contribution to this film in making a success.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much for having us.